This is the Apollo 11 cockpit that put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon in 1969. And these are the switches and knobs that they used to control the computer for that space module. Really, there hasn't been fundamentally too much that's changed about the computer since the 1960s, but there has been one thing that really has changed dramatically.
I think I know what you're talking about. You're referring to Moore's Law, right?
Right.
Now, what Moore's Law says is that every 2 years, the processing power of computers doubles while the cost halves. So we got these amazing technologies, exponential growth, what puts smart watches on your wrist and what puts these amazing phones in our pockets.
Yeah, actually, the phone in your pocket, the iPhone, about 100 million times faster than this computer that put us on the moon. It's crazy.
That's incredible. And around the same time that we put these astronauts on the moon, we had our first clinically used ultrasound machines. Look at this thing. It's huge. It takes up the entire room. Check out this one, the upgraded version, the pan scanner. They basically had to put a patient in a bathtub and have the probe rotate slowly around the patient to get the images.
Yeah, I can see it now. Quick, my critical patient, throw him in the bathtub. Love it.
Yeah, that would probably not work.
So 50 years of ultrasound, and this is what you got. So definitely machines have gotten smaller and smaller, and this is because of Moore's Law, for sure. But there's fundamentally one thing that makes all these machines the same. Jacob, do you know what it is?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the tech that makes us have these images, and that is the piezoelectric crystal. This is basically the same in all ultrasound machines. Now, what they do is they take these magical crystals and they cut them down to these tiny little sizes, about the width of a human hair. They slap those things onto a transducer, and that ends up running like 6 to 12 grams per transducer usually. And that's how we get our ultrasound machines. And that's like so tiny. Like, how did they get them that small?
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure, but I think they use a tiny saw like this one.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So enter the Butterfly network. Okay, so what Butterfly has done is they've reinvented the ultrasound from the ground up. They figured out how to print an ultrasound machine basically on a solid-state chip with 9,000 tiny metal transducers. They can actually produce a probe. I mean, this has dramatically dropped the price of the probes down to the low, low price of $19.95.
Ben, that seems kind of low. I mean, I know it's cheap, but I don't think it's that cheap.
We might have a rogue decimal point. Okay,
yeah.
So, but still, just under $2,000, a probe in your pocket is pretty amazing. Although I will say it's just starting to sound like an infomercial.
Yeah, I mean, hold up. It's not all lollipops, not all unicorns. I think that with everything, just like any good Game of Thrones character, there are two sides to the story. Now, if you guys know us, you know that we are ultrasound zealots. We love the ultrasound machine. Some people might call us ultrasound aficionados. And although I'm not like a huge fan of it, sometimes people call us even ultrasound nerds.
I'll take it.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. But even if you're the best ultrasound supporter, you love it, you have to admit that any time that you have disruptive innovation, there comes with it a potential for a dark side.
I see where you're going. Okay, so take this equation. This is something I remember from engineering school back in the day. So I remember that if you wanted to test the limits of a system, you take one of the dependent variables to the extreme and see how it performs and see what breaks. Let's do that with the ultrasound industry. So let's take the price of ultrasound down to 0. Suddenly, we've got an ultrasound machine in everyone's pocket for free. What happens to patient care?
Okay, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. I'm going to go down this rabbit hole with you. So let's say that we have, I don't know, an anesthesia resident does a phenomenal job at landmark-based central venous access, right? They do great. They're like the best in the whole hospital. You tell them, hey, I know that you do this great under ultrasound, under landmark guidance, but all the guidelines say use ultrasound, so you have to now use your ultrasound guidance for this central line. And maybe this resident doesn't have great supervision because he's done great in the past. You adds this extra thing to it, goes right through the jugular and into the esophagus, which happens. We've seen that at our institution where we have previously worked together. The one good thing, if we're going to glass half full the situation, at least he didn't need an NG tube because he had the percutaneous one.
It's already there.
Yeah. And this is something that happens in the literature, right? We have plenty of cases of ultrasound-guided IJs ending up in the carotid. It still happens.
Fantastic case. Here's the second case. 45-year-old female comes in, critically ill, hypotensive, peri-arrest, hypoxic. So you grab your ultrasound machine, you do a brush exam, you do a bedside echo, and this is what you see. So in this apical view, you can see a huge RV. The septum is bowing into the LV, and this really sick, hypotensive, hypoxic patient you're thinking this has got to be a massive pulmonary embolism. I've got to get thrombolytics on board yesterday. But if you were really fast cell at ultrasound, you realize that the probe's actually flipped. This is your image. Now we're talking about cardiogenic shock. Way different management. So now you're talking about inotropes, you're talking about diuresis. I mean, I don't know, Jacob, if you've seen the literature on use of thrombolytics and CHF, but it's been disappointing.
Yeah. Not been too good. So, all right. I think we should probably change the title of this talk to Advances in Ultrasound Tech, a Cautionary Tale.
Love it. Yeah.
So to adequately use ultrasound, you basically need three things. You need to have a machine, you need to be able to acquire the images, and you need to be able to interpret and utilize those images effectively, accurately, and safely.
And when you first start learning any new skill, you're going to be subject to the dreaded Dunning-Kruger Effect. And this is where, of course, your confidence way outweighs your abilities. You really, literally don't know what you don't know yet. Also, with any new tech, you tend to rely on that tech more than things you've come to rely on in the past, like your history and physical and your clinical gestalt. I mean, those things we've come to rely on.
Right. So yes, get an ultrasound machine. Yes, attend a couple of courses if you're not familiar with it. But yes, practice. Make sure that you're good at this machine, but don't let that preclude you from actually grabbing the ultrasound and using it. Just because you haven't used it in the past or you're not used to it does not mean that it should not be something that should not, or that should be utilized. That actually reminds me of a quote. Do you mind if I?
Please.
Okay. That it will ever come into general use, notwithstanding its value, is extremely doubtful, because its beneficial application requires much time and gives a good bit of trouble, both to the patient and the practitioner, because its hue and character are foreign and opposed to all of our habits and associations. Now, this quote was not about the ultrasound. This quote was actually about the stethoscope in the London Times in 1834.
And interestingly, in the 19th century, it became so popular to be known as the doctor who could use the stethoscope that doctors would actually just wear the stethoscope even though they had no idea how to use it. So, and that actually reminds me of a picture I saw recently.
So if you don't know how to use this, let's use it. It's pretty trendy to have this thing in your pocket, and I think that it is absolutely necessary and has a huge potential for benefit, but learn how to use it. There's a veritable cornucopia of free, open access medical education online. Find an ultrasound mentor. If you don't have one in your institution, there's plenty of them on Twitter. ACEP recommends about 25 to 50 scans per application to become competent in ultrasound for that specific application. And you know what? That's totally doable. If you do a couple of scans a shift, within a month, you'll have at least that 25, if not 50 of those scans.
And certainly, once you have the training, once you're educated, once you can use it, let's talk about a couple of cases where it became very beneficial.
Great.
So here's your patient. 62-year-old guy, diabetic, found slumped over in his desk at work. EMS is called out. They find the guy to be pulseless, so they start CPR. So they bring the patient to you. You get a call. They're 2 minutes out, but your ER is totally full. Your recess bay is full. The only room you've got is a tiny little room. You put them in there, and this is what a typical CPR would look like in my shop. So you're doing CPR. All these people are around the patient's care area, and you throw that ultra-portable, ultra-cheap ultrasound machine right in the chest. You got your iPhone in one hand, got your probe in the other, and you see this. During CPR, this is sort of a peristernal view, you can see a whole lot more of the heart than you really should be seeing. So you reposition the provider's hands, get high-quality CPR. Ultimately, the patient gets ROSC, gets an LAD lesion stented, and survives neuro-intact.
Yeah, and this is a great case of ultrasound, this portable ultrasound being useful. Now, one thing that I'm very passionate about is this kind of situation because we see it a lot. So you have a patient that calls EMS. They are so short of breath that they can barely talk, but they're able to give EMS the address. They get there, the patient has severe respiratory distress, respiratory rate in the 50s, tachycardic. He has a history of COPD and has a history of CHF and COPD. Which route do you take? Do you go nitro? Do you go albuterol, ipratropium? Now, I feel like I know what you're going to tell me right now.
Let's listen to the lungs. Physical exam.
Yeah, let's do the physical exam, which we definitely should be also doing our physical exam. It's a component, right? But I don't know if you guys know this, but wheezing for ruling in COPD has a positive likelihood ratio of like 2 to 3. It's not that great. Crackles on your stethoscope has a positive likelihood ratio of about 2.2 to 3 for ruling in CHF. So it's not that great of a test, actually. Luckily, your ambulance system has ultrasound machines on their trucks, and they're able to see this. These are sonographic B-lines. These sonographic B-lines, which essentially are the same thing as curly B-lines on an X-ray, these can rule in and rule out CHF. It has a positive likelihood ratio of like 20 and negative likelihood ratio less than that 0.1 that you need. You can do this in the patient's house, in his bedroom while he's like laying down. You can do it in the ambulance. You can do it in your ER, of course. You can take it anywhere. You can take it to base camp at Everest and diagnose your patient with high altitude pulmonary edema and disposition them accordingly. It's a really powerful tool to have this ultra portable ultrasound machine.
All right, so let me bring it home for you guys. Take home points. Yes, get an ultrasound machine. Yes, get training, learn how to use it. And yes, ultra portable, ultra cheap ultrasound stands to make an incredible global impact. Thanks for your time, guys.